Hi, everybody. This is my second FTI meeting. So thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion. In terms of my introduction, my name is Simone Samuels. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I'm Black. I'm a Black woman. I think that's a salient thing to say for this conversation. Um, my background, so I mentioned that because when we talk about racism, I come at it from a personal perspective, but I also come at it from a professional academic perspective. So my background, my undergraduate degree is in political science and philosophy. Then I went to law school at McGill University. Have a Bachelor of Arts in philosophy and political science, Bachelor of Civil Law, and Bachelor of Common Law from McGill. And then I worked for the Department of Justice, Canada, in the human rights law section. I've worked for Legal Aid Ontario. I've worked just in a lot of human rights, marginalized people positions. I've been the senior advisor for diversity, equity, and inclusion at York University here in Toronto. I've been DEI in director at a not-for-profit, and I currently do DEI consulting on the side. So all that to say, my background is in DEI. I took critical race theory in law school. So when we talk about definitions of racism, I'm going to be coming at this not only anecdotally, but I'm coming at this from what I hope you would appreciate is an informed position, having read and done research in this area. The other reason why I mentioned all the credentials was not to wow people, but for people to understand where I'm coming from. I'm not coming from this in order to attack any group. I'm not coming from this in order to offend any group. I'm simply letting people know what, from my experience, what I have learned and what the literature says about racism. Um, the other thing I want to make clear is I am not here to discuss racism. And you might be surprised by that. I'm not here to debate racism. Racism is a fact. So maybe other people here are here to debate racism, but as somebody who lives racism, I'm not here to debate my lived experience. Right. And I have to bring that up as a boundary because many people like to talk about racism like an abstract philosophical concept. But as somebody who is a Black person, racism is part of my lived reality, and it is actually about survival for me. So I don't have the luxury of pontificating about racism. It is a fact. So I just want to put that out there too. Um, and so with that clarification, we are here to discuss, not necessarily debate, but to discuss definitions of racism, not to discuss whether or not racism exists, because it exists as a fact, but discuss definitions of racism. The way that Garrett had characterized this evening, he asked me to share my definition that I like, and that he would share his definition. I would like to press back gently against that characterization because the definition, I haven't heard Garrett's definition of racism, by the way, but I may not necessarily disagree with it. I heard him say at the outset that racism is about fairness, and I agree with that. When you look in many different places, like I know people like to talk about dictionary definitions, you will see a definition that says something along the lines of racism is about exhibiting racial prejudice or racial hatred against somebody, or prejudice on the basis of race. And that is not a wrong definition. However, what has happened over time, and especially when George Floyd was killed in 2020, that we started to talk more about racism again. And I heard people start to talk about, I had, a neighbor, and they were Black and they wouldn't do XYZ because I was white and that's racist. I'm an aunt. I have a nephew who's 13. When he was younger, he would be playing Roblox and Minecraft or whatever it is that you play online. And his friends might say something about a Chinese person or might say something. And it's like, oh, you're being racist, so you're being racist. And I realized that a lot of people think that the mere mention or acknowledgement of race is racism, which is not true. And I realized a lot of people think that there's an equivalence in terms of racism. So when um, Garrett invited me to talk here, it came out of a discussion on feminism a few weeks ago, where I was talking about how, according to some scholars, and one definition of racism that I think we ought to discuss or acknowledge is the idea of, can Black people be racist to white people? I wrote an essay about that on Medium, and people were not happy about that because I think what a lot of people heard me saying is that Black people can't be stereotyped, or Black people can't stereotype, or that Black people can't be mean, or Black people can't be cruel, or Black people can't do something wrong. And I think a lot of people also heard, white people are always in the wrong, or the harm of white people doesn't matter. And a lot of people also heard it in terms of that binary, Black and white. But what I was trying to say is, just like when a man hits a woman is not the same as when a woman hits a man, because of the context of patriarchy. And so what I was trying to talk about in terms of that definition is like racism when a person with racial privilege, so the closest to um whiteness, the closer you are to whiteness, the more racial privilege you have. When a person with racial privilege does something on the basis of race to somebody without racial privilege, it's not the same in terms of impact and harm as when somebody without racial privilege does it to the person with racial privilege. Hopefully I haven't lost you all. So what I'm saying there is that racism, we cannot have racism without white supremacy. And if we're talking about white supremacy, the word supremacy implies that something is supreme and something is inferior. Racism comes from white supremacy. So that means there's whiteness. So whiteness has to be supreme to something. And with the construction of racism, whiteness is supreme to other people who move away from whiteness. So racism, white supremacy, necessarily entails a hierarchy, with white people holding racial privilege at the top, and then the more melanin you have in your skin, the less racial privilege you have. And that's where this idea, for some, that comes from, where Black people cannot be racist, even though they could be mean, horrible, exert harm, all the things, but racism may not be the appropriate word, because who are they going to be racist to? Who has who has less racial power, rather, than the people who are the darkest amongst us, right? That's where that one definition comes from. I also mentioned that definition because it takes into account the systemic and the institutional parts of racism, right? So when people talk about, I think it's racist. I'm a white person. I worked hard and I can't get into this university because all these Black people and all these indigenous people and all these brown people, all these immigrants are taking my spot. I can understand how that could feel unfair. But those definitions of racism that talk about interpersonal relationships don't get to policy. They don't talk about systems. They don't talk about institution. And that's why our definitions of racism can't just stay on the individual level and talk about our grievances with one another. They have to also include our systemic issues and our institutional issues. There's much more I could say there, but I think I said a lot. And I hope I didn't go too meta and too theoretical, but that is where I'm coming from.
Simone, along those lines, just out of curiosity, say we go to a country that is, um, you know, uh, where almost all the power, if not all the power, is in the hands of someone who's Black or people who are Black. Would you say in that country that, let's say Nigeria, right, where the power is in the hands of Black people, would you say that if a white person in that country um, was to punch and beat up a Black person and say, I did that because you're Black and that's the only reason, would you say that that white person is not racist?
I No, well, if they're saying that I'm doing this on the basis of you being black, this white person punching a black person, then yeah, that is racism.
So what if a black person in America, because this was an example that I gave you in our last talk, I said, what if a black person in America spits on me as a white person, which I'll go on video in a minute. I have to bring some food for myself because I haven't
Yeah.
had dinner yet. Spits on me and punches me was the example I gave you. And he said, I'm doing this just because you're white. Is he racist? I believe you said no. Is that, am I remembering that wrong?
No, you're not remembering that wrong. I said I would personally say no. I'm not saying that spitting somebody because they're white is right. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that the harm done is not wrong. It is wrong. You're not supposed to spit on anybody regardless of the race. You're not supposed to hit anybody regardless of their race. But I am saying that I would maybe call it discriminatory. I might call it prejudiced. I might call it cruel. I might call it mean. I would call it even criminal. But the word racism, I may not use. That's what I'm saying. I will
So you
also
wouldn't use the word
say
racism for the black person punching me in America because white people are in power.
it's not
But
about
you,
who, it's not about whether. So I think you're conflating, and the same thing happened in the feminist discussion, conflating who is in political power versus who has racial power. Those are not the same thing. They are often conflated, but they're not the same thing. So to use your example about, let's say we were in Nigeria and we have
Mhm.
black people in power. Having black people in power does not also mean they have racial privilege or racial power. You could have black people in power and they are disempowered, right? Same thing. You can have women in power, and then you can't say, "Oh, well, everything's fixed." Where we, we have right, everything's equal. No, it's within the context of sexism. So that's why because when I make this example about racism, it sounds abhorrent, like a black person could hit a white person and nothing happens. That is not what I'm saying. That's why I make the parallel with gender, because there's a lot of parallels between race and gender and ableism and transphobia, etc. So again, I'm going to use the example of a man hitting a woman, right? In let's say it's a domestic dispute. That is horrible. That is criminal. Should not happen. When a woman hits a man in a domestic dispute, that is horrible. That is criminal. Should not happen. But because of the context of patriarchy, I wouldn't look at the two the same way. Does that make sense? I'm trying to draw a delineation between the two because of the context of patriarchy, because we live in a system where men hold um um gender privilege. You can't just look at everything, okay, all things considered, because I think you're trying to draw an equivalence. And I'm just saying that they're not equivalent. And we don't live in a world where all things equal. How come this doesn't matter and this matters? I'm saying we don't live in a world where all things are equal. So the context informs how these individual actions ought to be seen.
So what describes racial power for you?
Racial power or racial privilege for me is people who hold um who the who hold the closer you are in proximity to whiteness, or if you have whiteness. So if you are white or white passing, you have racial privilege. And I'll draw a distinction here. Notice I said white or white passing. That means with the addition of white passing, there are some people who are black, as we know in the 1960s. They had racial privilege, even though they were black, because they were white passing. Do you see what I mean? So you could be a black person and have racial privilege depending on your proximity to whiteness.
Mm, I'm having trouble following. Um, can you did I didn't understand. And by the way, guys, I'm gonna ask some questions within we're gonna take questions after, I'm trying to ask clarifying questions from Simone, and then I'll present my definition and then I'll allow her to ask clarifying questions, and then we'll open it up to everybody after we kind of go back and forth.
Here, just let me, there's so many definitions that need to be addressed so far. We'll never get through them.
Well, Alan, that sounds pretty hopeless to me. I don't feel so hopeless. Um, I think that I'm clarifying the definitions that are pivotal in her definition of racism. So bear with me for the first 45 minutes, and let's see if we get somewhere. And if we don't, then I'll agree you were right and I tried my best. So Simone, when you say,
I'm going to get but I'm going to get basic and say, what is race in this context, and how many are there?
I do think that then we're getting into territory that is not super like, that's not important to the core of our argument, and so that's why I'm not addressing it. So just bear with us, Alan. Give us some time, okay? So Simone, can you maybe try again, like define like what you mean by racial power without assigning a permanent like racial superiority and inferiority, like
You can't.
of like hard assigned, which it sounds like you're saying black people always don't have power and white people always do have power regardless of the country they live in, who has political power. What would, let's take, for example, let's take Uganda in 1972 when the government, black majority government that controlled Uganda, basically uh, forced all Indian and Pakistani people, people of Indian and Pakistani heritage to leave. Um, would you have said that that was a case of racism, or would you say that's not racism, and why?
I would first reiterate that let's make sure that we're not conflating two different definitions of power, because I think you're still conflating two definitions of power in the sense that in your examples you continue to use situations where a racial group holds political power, right? And I think you're conflating that with also they hold racial power in that situation. And I'm
Yeah,
saying
that's because I don't know what you
sometimes,
mean by racial power.
so that's what I'm saying. Sometimes it's the same and sometimes it's different, right? So um to use your example, I would say that it is prejudice and discriminatory. I wouldn't use racism as that word. The reason why I came on here and said I'm not debating racism, I'm not debating what racism is because racism, if you look at the literature and certainly speak to the people affected by it, racism is a fact. When I say the people affected by it, white people are affected by racism too. And that might confuse you, but affected by it in the sense of like, it's dehumanizing, right? If what to be in an oppressor class and not recognize, the full humanity of who you are, right? So, okay, racial privilege, because this is a whole DEI like workshop. I'm trying to make like in mini. But what I mean by racial privilege is the way that you're able to move through society and your race does not make life harder for you. That's how I explain it to people when I do workshops. Because sometimes I'll hear people, especially white people, say, Simone, I don't know what you mean, because I know some black people who live way better than me. They drive a Rolls Royce, they are rich. So you're telling me that I have more power than them. And I'm saying you have more racial power or privilege, not that you have more economic power or privilege. So you can be, so the way I describe it is, yes, like let's say you're a poor white person, and yes, maybe you grew up in a single parent home or whatever, but your race is not one of the things that made your life harder. That is racial privilege. Same thing with being a man. You may have had a very hard life as a man, but your maleness, your gender did not make your life harder. I have privilege too. I'm very well educated. I just da 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 da. My education, I have had a very hard life, but my education has not made my life harder because I have educational privilege. I speak English as a first language, which is a privilege. I have language privilege. Me speaking English as a first language has not made my life harder. That is what I mean by privilege. So the closer you are in proximity to whiteness, which is at the top of the hierarchy, the more privilege you have.
Are you saying that in 1972 in Uganda, let's talk about that specific time just to be really clear, because I want to be consistent with the time period as well as location. You're saying that to be black in Uganda in 1972 made someone's life harder?
That is not what I said. I was saying, I'm saying
You
that
said you said racial privilege comes when being being your race doesn't make your life harder.
that is not what I said. When
Okay, then maybe I
your
misunderstood it. Help me understand what you said.
so when your race has not made your life harder, so AKA being white has not made your life harder. Being black has made my life harder. And brown
But
people, it's
in
made their life
Uganda,
harder.
if for someone that was 20 years or like born in Uganda in 1965 and they grew up in Uganda in that time, would you say that being black made their life harder in Uganda during that time period?
Even if they were in political power, yes, because the
Can
whole world has basically been colonized and white supremacy has touched basically every area of this world. You could have a unilaterally black country like Uganda that has still been touched by white supremacy.
Yep, I just want to jump in to say that I think a lot of times people look at African countries and they think that because there's mostly Black people are there, that race doesn't exist and stuff like that. But post-colonial studies show that race has impacted, colonialism has impacted African countries like no other, and a lot of resources are being taken away to Europe and other
Yeah,
countries.
Tari, I don't mean to interrupt you, but like we're gonna let everybody get to their questions like after we go back and forth. I'm just trying to understand Simone's perspective better. So and actually we're at 7:30, so I'm gonna stop. And then I guess I'll give my perspective. And then we can get back to we'll get to people being able to ask questions and sort of jumping in. So thank you, Simone. I appreciate your helping me try to better understand.
The one other thing I will add, so
Sure.
I gave a definition and why I believe in that definition. It is not like Alan was kind of leading to, it's not the only definition. Many scholars, a lot of literature agrees with the definition I just posited, but there's also people who have done CRT and done this work and would disagree with that definition, right? So just because you disagree with that definition doesn't mean that you're racist or anything, but I do think there are strong reasons to ponder what I just kind of posited.
Um, so thank you, Simone. Now let me share kind of more the common dictionary definition of racism, um, which is I think what most people use on a regular basis, which is basically beliefs such as discrimination, prejudice, or violence against people because of their race. Now I agree with Alan, defining race becomes a whole nother topic for another night. We don't have time for that, but if we can simply say that like black, white, Asian are races and start with that as a common agreement for tonight's conversation, um, then that's the definition that I use. So I would separate systemic oppression as a like an important topic and one that I've talked about a lot. I actually talked about when I talked about the justice system, the fact that there is systemic racism against Black people in the justice system after comparing like for like situation and everything. Like Black people and men are both, you know, persecuted by our justice system. You know, women get much lighter sentences for the exact same crimes, exact same situations, just like white people do. And both of those things, I would argue, are unfair. And again, fairness being the, you know, one of the North Stars of the Freethinker Institute, getting to the bottom of what is the most fair for everybody is super important to me. So I use this definition because um, I think that when someone is presented, and I'm very curious to hear from some of the conservatives of the group, some of the regular conservatives, and people have been sending me DMs, and I apologize, guys. I don't see them because I was first cooking, then eating, and I'm really bad at multitasking. Um, but uh, let's see. Okay, so that was someone trying to help me when we had a Zoom bomber, which I want to help them. Where did she go? There she is. Okay, so um, thank you, Jenna. I made you a co-host just in case we get more Zoom bombers. When we talk about anything like political, we get Zoom bombers. I'm surprised we haven't gotten more than one, to be honest. That's actually super shocking for me. Pleasantly surprised, though. Maybe Zoom is actually doing a good job stopping these people from coming back. Um, Although that one has definitely been back multiple times because it's the same thing every time. So anyway, part of the thing is, I guess, when people use the term, and by the way, I'm not saying that that Simone's definition is wrong. It's another definition. It's the one that is supported by academia. I'm going to make a slightly different argument that the common definition is one that touches me in a place like of fairness, right? Like when I see a person that, when I told this guy in college, like, if you spit on me and punch me because I'm white, would that be racist? And he said no. I was like, whoa, this just immediately violates my sense of fairness. And Simone's nodding. She gets it, right? Like there's this visceral reaction. And I guarantee that Sean and Bart and a bunch of the other conservatives that are here, I'm really eager to hear what they have to say when we start to get into Q&A, will agree with the fact that he's thumbs upping me, will agree with the fact that having this definition out there, I think basically um, gives people a buy or a sense that there is a buy for, and when I say a buy, I mean like an excuse for a black person to mistreat a white person because of their race or any like anyone, and I don't care what race is what. All I care about is that people treat each other fairly. And like what matters to me is that we all treat each other, politely at all times and that we treat each other fairly. My concern is that when someone creates a definition of racism that gives certain races the ability to not be called racist, when the term itself, if you look at the etymology, means to distinguish by race, um, that creates actually it it actually ironically makes the term racist by the normal term definition of racism, because you are actually using the definition of racism in a way that distinguishes by race. And so it's super ironic because the people who study this, as Simone said, are the ones advocating for this racist definition of racism. And I find that, again, when I say racist, I mean racist by my definition, not mine, but like the commonly used definition that 95 to 99% of people use every day. The problem is that what ends up happening is you get right-wing folks who then come out and say, this is what the DEI liberal folks, and Simone has a lot of academic background in this space. They go, this is what these DEI people are saying, that black people can't be racist and they can punch a white person in the face, make them bloody, and they're not a racist. That's crazy. And then they use that as ammunition to basically say DEI is all bad. And we did an event on DEI, Simone. I would love your feedback if you want to watch the YouTube video. I hope I did it justice, but you obviously have more background in it. I didn't know you then, or I would have had you co-present on that one too. Um, but um, but I think that racial double standard creates a lot of outrage amongst people who don't dig deeper into like understanding why do people use this definition. And I think if I'm channeling correctly, and Simone, you can tell me if I am, I think the reason for the if I'm trying to listen to understand for the academic reason for racism is to say we need to combat this institutional racism and, recognize that, you know, institutional racism is really the enemy. But for me, like, it actually ends up causing more harm, and Sean's thumbs upping that. It actually ends up causing more harm against institutional racism, because what it does is it gets people outraged against the quote unquote crazy liberal perspective that, you know, black people can't be racist, and then it makes people who would otherwise not be as racist against black people be more racist, because they're outraged against these people saying black people can't be racist. Now they have an excuse to hate black people. And again, I'm just using black and white as examples, but substitute any race that is considered minority or majority. We're just talking about the US for now, in my example. But and it also can erase racism between minority groups. You know, there's a lot of racism across, you know, all different races of different races. And I think that the idea that a person, you know, when this guy in college told me that he could punch me and beat me up and that he didn't have power, I'm like, if you just punched me and made my nose bloody, you sure as hell have power, buddy. Like, you had the power to beat me up. And so I guess, like, again, I think that they're using a very narrow definition of power that might be good for academics, but I think it actually causes more harm to the very things that those academics are fighting for, I believe are fighting for, by using that narrow definition, and one that sort of outrages people's common sense of fairness. Um, so it can also, you know, make people feel like their experience doesn't count if they were bullied because they were, you know, white in a primarily black neighborhood, right? Or, you know, I tried to buy a 3-bedroom condo, and then when I went to the other realtor, they're like, nope, you're not going to get it. You're not black. Like, they only accept black people, and that it's a co-op. And so they're allowed to choose who they want to accept. And legally, they're not allowed to be racist, but it was very clear that, you know, they were going to find out that I was white and I wasn't going to get it. Now, that's not making my life harder. I found another great place and it was fine. But, like, um, you know, racism happens to all races. And for me, like, I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think we should be trying to end all types of racism. Again, I'm using my definition now, just to be clear. Um, and um and I think that it's important to appeal to people's natural sense of fairness. So that said, I think that the big thing for me is that I think that the academics are not thinking of the practical implications of their definition, and there are much better ways to communicate what they want to communicate, achieve what they want to achieve. I think if they said institutional racism is bad and we need to fight against it, and we need to take this institutional racism, we need to take this white supremacy and combat it, I think they would be able to build a coalition of people behind that. I would actually argue that this definition of racism has created far more racism than it's prevented. And I think it's helped support white nationalism far more than it's prevented white nationalism. And I think that's, you know, one of those cases of people with good intentions that end up causing harm. And I've heard example after example of that, of not-for-profits thinking that they know better than the local populations how to help them, and not actually listening to the people they were trying to help. And so that's kind of my take. That said, let's open it up for questions. Carl was the first one with his hand. We're gonna go into the Q&A portion. When we do Q&A, the way we do this, because we have, 40 people, each time you raise your hand, you can introduce a new topic or ask a new question. Once that topic or question is introduced, we're going to have about 5 minutes of conversation. Right now, I'm going to limit the conversation per topic or question. You have two minutes to introduce the question or make the comment, and then we'll have up to 5 minutes of conversation about it. And then we'll move on to the next question. Most of the time, I'm going to try to be a little flexible if we're in the middle of like a really important discussion, et cetera, et cetera. So that said, that way, like when someone finishes their comment or question, anyone is allowed to reply, but keep your replies or your questions to under 20 seconds if you didn't raise your hand. And so think about what you want to say first and then jump in whenever there's a space. Just don't interrupt people because that's rude. So let's let Carl go.
Yeah, oh, I was just gonna say, Garrett, just because I'm
Yeah.
new, I don't know when to respond to people. So when we have that discussion, that's when I would respond, I guess.
Yeah, once
Okay.
Carl
Yeah.
will like ask a question, he'll ask it probably of you or me, and whoever he asks can answer that question. And then once one of us has answered, then the other one can jump in. So can anyone
Okay.
else here. It's kind of a free for all. Like if someone asks, by the way, guys, when you're asking a question, feel free to like specify if you want to ask me, Simone, or both of us. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to do that. I think my position kind of aligns a little bit more with yours, Garrett, in terms of fairness. And to me, any kind of discrimination is, I guess, the opposite of fairness. But I wanted to ask Simone specifically, just to clarify this idea of the black versus white, just to be simple. When so I view it as kind of like very, very simplistically, I guess you could say. For me, an ism means that it's a belief, a mindset about something. And most of the time, I mean, if we say capitalism, humanism, that's usually in a positive way, not to do with discrimination. But usually a lot of isms, racism, sexism, ageism, usually implies a prejudice and discrimination against a particular topic, in this case, age, sex, gender, or race. Without going too much into the race definitions, based on that simplistic kind of view of it, I'm wondering why is it not that if a black person, and regardless of, I think I understood the position of power and racist power, but as Garrett said, any kind of discrimination, regardless of the color of your skin, based on race, regardless of who the race is. So a black person who says that they have they're prejudiced or discriminating against a white person, regardless of motive, would be technically be racism, wouldn't it? So any race towards any race, if it's a mindset that is prejudiced or discriminatory based on just race, would be racism.
So I'm revising my position in real time because I came here to learn. I didn't come here to be like just a subject, right?
Yeah.
And I came
That's
here to
great.
be challenged and to see things differently. So,
Yeah.
and what made me think, was not just your question, but when you talked about ageism.
Yeah.
Because if an old person said, for lack of a better word, if an older person said, I'm not going to hire you because you're too young, I would call that ageism.
Yeah.
And if a young person said, I'm not going to hire you because you're too old, I would call
Exactly.
that ageism, right?
Yep.
And that's why, like, when I'm trying to work through things, I like to see, okay, is this replicable in other groups? So, like, when I say that Black people can't be racist, I also am open to the idea that, well, the Black people can be racist if people give me a good reason for it. And
Yeah.
so in that sense, I'm like, okay, I do see what you're saying. And again, that's why I said the idea Black people can't be racist is many people hold that view, but it is still seen as controversial. There are many people just as educated and more than me who would say, Simone, I actually think you're wrong here. I think that it is, So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say with Garrett, because I didn't get to respond to what Garrett just said, but also what you're saying, Carl, is I actually agree. I'm not actually against that. I guess why I started to think more deeply about can Black people be racist and talking to my other friends and like, what do you think about this? Is because so many times when I hear racism talked about, it makes it seem like there's an equivalence. It makes it seem like again, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but this idea of like, okay, like if if this white person, this white police force, right, gets like racially profiles and mostly Black people are incarcerated, it's the same as if you had a police force of all Black people and they are racial and that they're you know, all white people are racially profiled. And I'm like, when I hear like, let's say that example, I'm like, both are problematic, but it's not the same.
Right, right.
Hopefully
Yeah.
folks on the call can see that. Like both are problem. Maybe some of you are like, no, it is the same. But I'm saying no, it's not the same because of the history of policing, because of who typically gets stopped. You know, it's not the same. And that's why I use the woman and man example, right? Because yes, if a woman hits her man, slaps him across the face, she should be taken into custody. That is harm, and I would, especially since men find it so hard often to be believed in domestic violence, I would never say that does not matter. It matters. But what I'm saying is within the context of patriarchy, within the context where most domestic violence victims are female, it's not the same. So that's what I'm
Right.
trying to get at. I'm not trying to say, you know, black people have carte blanche to do
Mm.
whatever they want to do. And
Yeah.
to Garrett's point, if you, I know I'm talking too much, but to Garrett's point, if you allow me, um, that's why when I do workshops on DEI, I also have to think about, yeah, Simone, you might believe it and you might say it this way, but how's it gonna land? Because if the goal of my workshop is for all of us as a workplace to be like kumbaya and work together, I don't go into workshops and say, hey, black people can't be racist. That's not gonna be helpful. But I did want to speak to your definition thing that you said, because the fact with definitions, like if you turn to Merriam-Webster and you know Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever have you, definitions in the dictionary are descriptive. They're not prescriptive. They describe the common usage of a word. They're not telling us how the word ought to be used. And I can tell you from a legal standpoint, and I'm sure this is the same thing in the United States, when the Supreme Court wants to figure out what is racism, or when our human rights commissions here in Ontario, our Ontario Human Rights Commission has a case in front of it and it's trying to figure out definition, they don't go to Merriam-Webster. They don't even go to Black's Law Dictionary. They go to the scholars, they go to jurisprudence to see how racism actually operates and to see how it's been defined by scholars, sociologists, CRT scholars, other
Try to
legal
finish your thoughts,
scholars,
Simone.
right? So I think that's important. So I don't take the dictionary as an authority.
I hear you, Simone, but my quick point is that this current Supreme Court is not going to use that definition of racism unless to say that white people can't be racist ever. If they were going to use a definition, it would be that one. So I wish that it was otherwise. But that said, I want to go to the next question with Carrie.
All right, thank you very much. All right, this is an important topic to me, mainly because it addresses our duty to maintain our language. Definitions matter. And one thing that, since the advent of writing, keeping our language as consistent as possible while still being accurate is one of the reasons that we can read things like the Constitution and understand it and not need an interpreter. It's not an ancient dead language, at least not yet. Having said that, what is largely happening as science and our academic pursuits move forward is we hopefully get more refined. Now, what should happen when you do that is you end up needing new words that apply to your refinements. You don't just pile more into the previous word. That makes the word less effective, not more effective, right? This also allows, essentially what you do, if you expand the word racism, it allows you to perform guilt by association, right? Because the word's powerful. Nobody likes being called a racist, right? So if you increase that definition, now all of a sudden you can add to the targets that you use that word for. Now, an example of dividing these language would be something like sex and gender, right? Which used to travel in lockstep. They were treated as synonyms until at some point somebody said, hey, there's a cultural aspect here and maybe we should separate the biological from the cultural, which made a lot of sense to folks. And we're in the middle of doing that now. but you need to respect it if and be consistent with it. But I'd say that that's a positive outcome, not a negative outcome. So that would be kind of my first foray. Anyway, thank you.
Only, oh, I forgot to say, each time we raise our hand, only one topic at a time. So we got you just in time because that was your first, Carrie. But
Oh yeah, one
yeah,
topic.
just for
I
other
think I
people, I
stayed on
forgot to
top.
say that.
Okay.
So Simone, do you want to respond to that?
I see what you're saying. Where did you go? Everybody moves around. I see what you're saying. Oh, there you are, Carrie. But I would also say that language is dynamic and language changes. And I always marvel at how, like, I follow a lot of the dictionaries, their social media, and they'll talk about how we're adding 6, 7 to the dictionary. And I'm like, why? Why are you adding, the Gen Z 6, 7? Like, why are you adding that to the dictionary? I thought we would add like actual words, but it's because language changes. So I guess, you know what I mean? I agree with you, but I would give that caveat.
I agree with you, Simone, but here's my concern. If you give that example and then you look at civil rights rules, the Supreme Court, the current one, could very easily say, well, you know, interpret the definition the opposite and say, oh, it's um basically that white people can't be racist, and therefore if white people use their power to discriminate against minorities, it's a-okay, and we're reinterpreting the civil rights laws by redefining the term racism in the very way that academics are using it, but with a little switcheroo, right? And then suddenly the very laws that were meant to protect minorities are used to oppress them.
So I would say that's a uniquely American problem,
I
unfortunately,
mean,
as
hate
somebody
to
who
tell
lives
you,
in
but this is
Canada.
where we are as Americans.
Because in Canada with common law, the basis of common law is you have to follow jurisprudence, and which means stare decisis, which is a Latin word for whatever was decided before. So however racism was decided before, that's typically what you bring forward, or you not reinterpret, but you expand it. And I know somebody here talked about expanding, but they will expand it. But usually here in Canada, something like that wouldn't be completely overturned.
Yeah, we are common law based, but we just had the right to have an abortion overturned federally. So, while we have common law, our current activist Supreme Court judges, the conservatives on the bench, don't really care about precedents. They do what they want to do. They've legalized bribery. They've legalized lots of things that most of us would say are not ethical. But that's the end of that topic. So let's let Jody go. Jody, good to see you. Jyoti, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I didn't. You were calling me Jody, so I
I'm
was
sorry,
like,
Jyoti.
that's not
Sorry, I
me.
pronounced it wrong.
So I just want to kind of humanize this by talking about an anecdote, Simone. I'm like, I call myself a citizen of the world because I was born in India and I've lived all over the world. And then I moved to the United States when I was in high school and university, and then I've worked all over. And I'm in an Uber ride, and the gentleman who's driving me is, I'm just going to be racist and say a big black man. Okay. So I start talking to him, and he describes how he's been in the military, how he's just come back from Korea. And I'm curious, and we start a conversation. And the quote unquote liberal part of me is going, he's just another human. Come on. You've done, you're a creative writer, you've studied liberal arts, you've read all these freaking books. Why are you feeling emotionally a little bit scared of this person? And later on, Paisley came, we kind of became friends. He came into my house, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I had no, but still that feeling kept nagging at me. Like, and then I realized, hey, wait a sec. My roommate in university was Black, But other than that, I have not had any contact with Black people because we're so freaking segregated. I mean, I live in a part of Austin where I hardly see any Black people. They're all on the east side. They were kicked out from where my neighborhood is. Literally, they live there, and everybody just bought that area out and they moved to the east side. But just to humanize it, that even though, quote unquote, I considered myself not racist, that media fear still existed, not just because he was Black, not just because he was big, and not just because he was a man. But I really had to, like come to terms and realize what I was feeling and go beyond that, in a form of curiosity. So, it's there underneath. However, you really, and I must say, I'm proud of myself. Paisley's one of my best friends now. And we were even sitting in the car, and I was like, I called him African American. He looks at me and like, what the hell's an African American? I'm like, but I'm just trying to be nice. And he's like, no, I'm Black. I'm like, okay, what would you like to be called? And now when we interact with each other, we say his people and my people. Like that's a language that we're comfortable with. So it's different when it comes close to you. And you might think, you're a certain way, but then it's so close to you and you're like, oh, okay, all those.
Try to finish your thought, Judy.
Yeah, just very quickly, all the media, all the articles, everything that you thought, nope, they don't belong to me, are actually in there somewhere. And you have to develop the courage and curiosity to go over them. Thank you for coming here and expanding on this.
Jody, I have a question for you. Do you feel more nervous around men than you do women typically?
No, not really. I mean, unless the man is being handsy or something, I'd kick him, but.
But if you're walking down the street at night and there's a group of men in a doorway that you're walking past, or versus a group of women, would you feel more of an elevated risk with the men than the women?
Well, see, I'm like 40 now. So if I was 18, yes, I would have. And I grew up in Kuwait, where it's a very misogynistic society. And I had people just pull down their pants and show me their penis. So when I was 12 years old. So yes, at 18, yes. But now at 40, having lived through epilepsy and all of that, I found that people are actually nice. When I fell down on the sidewalk, they called EMS for me. So I don't know. I mean,
I guess my question would be, would that make you sexist than your feelings at 16 or 18?
If I was scared of us.
If you're scared of men just because they're men, would that make you sexist?
I don't know. I don't know unless, yeah. At that point, when I first had Paisley in the car, I probably was racist too. So unless I interact with them, maybe in my mind, based on my history, I might think they're sexist or misogynistic. But once I interact with them as human beings, it becomes different. So that's what I'm trying to bring to this conversation.
If I can try to respond to what Carrie was saying, I think that there's a very physical difference between the strength of a man and the strength of a woman, whereas race doesn't indicate strength in a significant way. The other thing that I'll mention is that a lot of people use the example that Carrie is using to say, well, Black people commit more crimes. And I got into a debate with a guy who was racist, and he said that statistic to me. And of course, like me, I fact checked it and it turned out to be true. But then, of course, like me, I dug deeper and I learned that almost all violent crime is Black on Black crime. And so actually for me, walking by a group of Black men, I shouldn't feel any less safe than walking by a group of white men, because I'm not any more at risk than I would be from a group of white men. Now, someone who just says Black people commit more crimes might make that blanket statement that they should be more at risk, but actually, unless they're Black, they shouldn't feel more at risk. So it becomes this very more nuanced situation
Yeah,
than people
so
think of.
that was kind of what I was trying to emphasize, Garrett,
Yeah.
is that you might, and it's very deep in the core because you have heard, you know, that Black men are a lot more violent than, you know, white, yellow, whatever. But you really have to work hard to step out of that, you know, step away from that a little bit and explore a person as a person. And it's hard. It's really hard. I was like, hey, wait a sec. I'm not this person.
Yeah,
I
but
would never do this.
it's by challenging your own, like recognizing your own feeling there, Jyoti, and growing from it, that I think is important. And I've been through that myself. And I thought I was out of it, and then I watched the movie Amistad because I speak Spanish, thinking it was a friendly Spanish flick. I was the only white guy. I was with an Indian friend with very dark skin that could pass as black, and I'm watching all these white people just destroying these black people, and I'm like, shrinking. I'm shrinking. Felt very uncomfortable for a while. And I'm like, I wasn't one of them. So, but yeah, anyway, let me go to Paul's question. Thank you, Jyoti.
Thank you. So any discussion of racism and CRT in this country is predicated on one concept more than any other, and that's the concept of power. This is what exempts certain people from being racist versus what's usually white people, their ability to be racist. The problem is the concept of power, how it's used, is never an independent variable that can be tested. It's actually derived from the prior claim that whites occupy the apex of racial hierarchy, which means they have the power. If you say, is a white person working under a black boss under the power of a black person? That's discounted. No, that doesn't count. If the mayor of that town or the city council is majority black, that doesn't count. The governor of the state is black, that doesn't count. If the courts ruling over the state are black, have a majority black, that doesn't count. When Barack Obama is president, that doesn't count. Every time I've ever challenged this concept of power, I've never gotten a usable, falsifiable definition of what that power is. So my question to you is, are you able to actually define power in a way that makes it a variable that we can test to determine whether or not something is racist?
That's for you, Simone, I think.
I was like, we are gay.
No, that's
So
you.
Paul, I was with you until you said, you know, that the other premises, right? That doesn't count, that doesn't count. Because I actually would disagree. I'm sorry if other people have said that doesn't count, but we have to talk about what do you mean by that not counting, etc. So like for instance, if you have a black person who's a boss and somebody is white underneath them, that does count. But tell me, like that does matter. That there's a hierarchy there,
Okay,
but
so
not a racial one.
can the black boss be racist against his black employee then?
By
Wait a
some
second.
definitions, yes. By the definition I espouse, no. But I think both
Well,
people could
that's
be
what I'm
right.
questioning, your definition.
Right? I'm trying to answer your question in terms of a good definition of power. I'm being put on the spot, so I'm afraid it's not going to be the best definition. But I talk about power and I conflate power and privilege. I'm putting them together, right? The idea of who has who's going to face less discrimination in this situation, who's going to have the least negative attribute things attributed to them, who has the most barriers in terms of equal access, in terms of equity, in terms of living their life free. Like, and I'm not just thinking in terms of racialized people. I'm thinking in terms of like, I'm you trying to create a definition that would work for you know, cisgender people and trans people, for women and men and non-binary people, for able-bodied people and disabled people. Like any definition of privilege and power cannot just make sense for one group, if that makes sense. I know there's a time limit. I would say more, but is that slightly helpful?
No, if it's going to mean anything, it has to be testable. In other words, you have to look at a person, say, working in that job and say whether or not he has power and privilege in that position, or whether the hierarchy stack above him reverses it, which makes it completely unworkable. Because what you've got is you've got this concept of power. And in CRT, and I've read Crenshaw, I know exactly what CRT is. Institutional power is predicated on this idea that white people are maintaining this country as a white nationalist country. Therefore, all have power and privilege. However, when you are imagining, say, a poor Appalachian coal miner with a black boss in a black town with a black governor and a black president, it's hard to see how there's any definition that fits that this white person has any power and privilege over anybody else. See, it
And,
makes it undefined and it makes it non-falsifiable.
so I had said earlier, and I think this is my third time reiterating it, and I don't mind. I heard somebody said repetition deepens impression. We are conflating different uses and different definitions of power, right? Power is not just economic, and power is not just racial, and power is not just in terms of your ability to do things, and power is not just cognitive, right? In this conversation, when I talk about power, I'm strictly talking about racial power. And I find it so interesting in this conversation, and when we had the conversation on feminism, anytime somebody gave an example, it was always about, well, somebody's in a position of power, and they made it about leadership. And all the examples had to deal with somebody in government, because it sounds like here we're only able to think about power as if you're in an actual employment government role position, and that is not how I'm using the word power. So
Yeah.
some
You
people,
said
like I
what it's
mentioned,
not. You said what it's not, but you haven't said what it is.
So
so
if I could just jump in, I did to not just put Simone on the spot. I wanted to look up what the academic definition was, and it turns out there isn't a commonly accepted academic definition. The most common view is institutional or societal power. So I think, Simone, it might be worth just thinking about what Paul has said, because I don't agree with Paul very often, but in this case, I will agree with him and say, if power is not clearly defined, then you can't define whether or not anyone has it, including white people, because without a clear definition, you can't attribute it to someone. And if that definition can't change from white people to someone else over time, then it's not a fair definition in the first place. And so I would just encourage you to think about that. And I want to move on to the next question. So I don't want to go back and forth because we have a lot of hands up. Zuni, did you want to say something quickly? Okay. Sean.
Hi there. Thanks, Garrett. And thanks, Simone, for coming out here. We've talked about DEI and CRT in different meetings, so it's great to have somebody here who has a degree in it, does DEI as a profession, and we've often talked about different definitions of this. So I really appreciate to have somebody, and I agree with all of your definitions from a CRT perspective. That does seem to be what my reading has been about how racism is treated and all of that. The issue I have with the definition that CRT uses for racism, that it's power plus prejudice, is that essentially the common parlance that, and I think you've even acknowledged this, the common parlance that everybody's so used to when they say somebody is a racist is generally understood to mean discriminatory based on race, prejudice based on race. And it's often one of the worst type of insults you can say to somebody, so much so that you can be fired from your job, you can be reputationally ruined. If somebody is accused, like if XYZ celebrity went on a racist tirade, that person is getting fired from their job, they're not working for a while, all of those type of things. So I think while what CRT tries to do is kind of a redefine it in kind of a word game doing this type of thing, which is useful for its own purposes because it allows them to, CRT people to propose policies that would normally be seen as racist or discriminatory, but they seem to be done in a way to make up for past historical wrongs. And what I hear, where I hear the issue that we keep seeming to stumble upon is the difference between institutional power versus systemic power in this conversation, where Garrett's pointing towards African nations where you would have a lot of institutional power. But systemic power, as I understand it, so institutional being laws, policy, who's in charge currently, but systemic is much more about historic and unconscious oppression that happens to over long periods of time, and is almost kind of how culture gets almost imprinted on or becomes like a custom or tradition, to where people might not even know they are, but they've heard it for so long. But the issue I hear often with that is historic marginalization. No matter if we go 200, I am, this is the last bit. If we go 200 years or 300 years in the future, somebody who is historically marginalized will always be historically marginalized because history happened. So how do you ever change historic marginalization as far as power goes?
That's the whole conversation of reparations. And that's why reparations is so hard, and why so many countries balk at this idea of reparations. And for the UK to even begin to contemplate to give reparations to all the Caribbean islands, let alone the African nations that they colonized, that would bankrupt the UK for millennia. So how do you even begin to repair? I agree.
If that were to happen, if say America did reparations, the UK, a lot of these countries did reparations, would we at that point say white supremacy or systemic racism is over? I don't think we would.
Yeah,
they did
I have
reparations. They did do reparations.
Yes, they did do for, I forget which country. They did do but not for all the countries
And
that
they
had
did
colonized.
reparations for the owners.
Yes, exactly. For
Yeah.
the owner, that's what I'm saying. And I forget which country. Either it was France or another colonizing country, or was it Denmark? Can't remember. Said that they would do reparations. Don't quote me on this. But I have a pessimistic view. I don't I think there will always be white supremacy. Many people may disagree with that for good reason, but I'm very pessimistic. It is so entrenched in how we do things, and many of us benefit from it, that I don't think there will be an end to white supremacy.
White supremacy ends when we stop having an inferiority complex. This is my own understanding of it for myself, the minute I feel inferior. Anyway, sorry, continue with what you're doing.
I would disagree, but that's
because I'm inferior when I'm in these countries, but when I'm in my own countries, I've got 40 other countries I can live in. I'm not inferior there.
That is true, but again, that would be on the interpersonal level. That doesn't even touch the systemic and institutional white supremacy. That doesn't even speak of policies and things in place that keep people in their position.
And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? This is a country that's ruled by the white class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would there not be racism here?
Okay.
Simone, I just want to, so if I understand you correctly, would you say systemic racism, though, is something that will, regardless of reparations or any other efforts like that, can never really be overcome? Black people will never be able to be racist by your definition, according to theory.
I would say, so what I understand you, or what I hear you saying is, will we be ever able to uproot systemic racism? And I am so pessimistic and so tired by this work that I feel like no, we will not be able to fully uproot systemic racism. Like this, the very way that we buy houses, the very way the LSATs, the medical profession, obstetrics is based on systemic racism. It is so entrenched that I don't even know how we even begin.
Well, Simone,
we certainly should begin.
What about my example of Uganda? Like, wouldn't you agree that there's no systemic racism against Black people in Uganda?
No, I would not agree, because Uganda is a colonized nation. Weren't they colonized?
But right now, like where there are historical harms caused, sure, but like systemic racism says that the current systems of power have, racist tendencies. And I would argue the laws in Uganda were not racist against Black people. The current laws are not racist against Black people. The most recent laws were actually racist against Asians. So yeah, there was racism there, but like not racist
I-
against Black people.
But Garrett,
May-
that's the
mm,
difference between institutional racism and systemic racism. And I see Simone nodding her head.
Well, may I just add a little thing as far as the international aspect is concerned? Is if you're an American, white American, trust me, you're at the top of the ladder, no matter where you go.
I would argue DEI policies tend to try and overcorrect for that, GOT.
Can you, what policy are you talking about specifically?
Policies that are about attempting to change representation at different places if they think there are too many, say, whites.
Guys, there are a
employed.
ton of hands
Oh, sure.
up. So
I can back off.
yeah, I want to go to the next question, unfortunately. Although I'm going to put the definitions of institutional racism and systemic racism in the chat for people to look at, because I would argue that, you know, neither one of them applies to Uganda against being racist against Black people. But
okay, but to
I
your
want to go to the
example,
next question. Sorry,
Okay.
Simone. John, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So Garrett, this is kind of just for you, and obviously anybody can speak on it. But you were talking about fairness, and I agree with that. But the whole topic that we're talking about is kind of just a slippery slope. And like, when you think about fairness, what is fair to everybody, like, is different. So I kind of just want to know, like, what is everyone's like kind of idea of fairness?
Thanks, John. You actually you're gonna make me go into the FTI's six intentions, but I'll give two of them right now because it's what we define as fair in the FTI, and I'd be curious to hear if anyone doesn't agree with these two rules, because so far across the political spectrum people have. The first is that we should prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to any human being, full stop, whenever we can influence it. The second is that, and a necessary harm is one that prevents a greater harm. So if I shoot a person shooting school children, that's a necessary harm to prevent the greater harm of the kids being shot. And then the second is that we should increase happiness and decrease harm for the people we can influence over their lifetimes, with the priority being on the people we can influence the most. That's what I would argue is fair. And I think that when you go to the definition of racism I used, pretty much everybody would agree that you know, racism, or that, you know, punching me because I'm white or punching a Black person because they're Black is unfair. Like very, very, very few people would say that that's not unfair. Like very few people would try to justify that that's fair. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, that makes sense. Those are actually pretty good opinions.
Thank you. It took me hundreds of hours to come up with the six intentions of, like, now probably more than that. So yeah. Anyone else have comments on that?
I was gonna add, like, so it depends again. For me, it's always contextual. So I agree with your definition of fairness. I will also say that oftentimes people think fairness is equality, just like how we're running this meeting. You're trying to be equal to everybody, equal time. But equality is not always fairness. Equity and equality are two different things. And for me, now that I do this work, I see that fairness and justice is more about equity than equality.
Would you say, Simone, that equity is often equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunity?
Yeah, exactly. So ensuring equal access, if you will.
Thank you.
Well, so Simone, would you say that, because this is a long-standing debate between Sean and I here, so that's why he's asking these questions, and so I'm gonna bite Sean. So would you agree that if you gave everybody an equal opportunity to education, regardless of their socioeconomic situation, their race, et cetera, that would be equity, and that the smartest, hardest working people are more successful, that would still be equity because those are the smartest and hardest working people? Or are you saying that real equity to you means everybody in the world makes the same amount of money regardless of anything, including effort and intelligence?
Your latter example is an example of equality, not equity. So equity means equality of outcome, which means everybody has the same like opportunity to have the same, again, opportunity, not necessarily that it's insured, but
Well, that's
opportunity
why
to have the same outcome.
Sean said the same outcome, and you
Right.
agreed with him. And I think
Yeah.
that what equity means is that everybody has the same opportunities, not necessarily the same outcome.
So I always think back to, and I can't pull it up right now, but everybody maybe, or maybe most people have seen that fence
Yep.
diagram,
Yep.
right? So different people are going to need different things to access the ballpark, the ball game the same way, right? To have equal access to seeds. That's the equal outcome. We're all able to watch the baseball game, right? So when you say, is equality like, helping people have access regardless of their socioeconomic, you can't actually do that regardless of their socioeconomics. You have to take their socioeconomics into account in order to give them equal outcome.
Yeah, but if you do take their socioeconomic situation into account and you give everybody an equal opportunity or like equal access to learning, the same tools, the same structures, the same educational experience, and even let's suppose you could also take the same home experience and truly give everyone the same opportunities, wouldn't that be equity? Why not?
But that's an ideal that you're
It
talking
is. It
about.
is. This
It,
is a
yeah,
this
it's
is a thought
not.
experiment, right? Like the idea
Yeah,
of
but
equity
that's,
is obviously unachievable right now. Like,
yeah.
Oh, it's very achievable.
okay,
Equity is
so
achievable.
how do you achievably? We need to do another event on how equity is achievable because we have a ton of hands up, and I want to keep going.
I
But
agree with
Just
Simone, though.
I just wanted to say one little thing about your example where you were saying that, okay, socioeconomically, you have the same access to education, blah, blah, blah. But there's a huge difference between a first generation person in college versus a third generation person in college. And they might have the same access, but what's happening behind the scenes is equally important.
You could still give everyone the same base education, same school, same curricula, same book, same everything. And if at the end of the day you still had a disparity of outcomes for groups, it would still be systemic racism.
It would be inequitable because you
so,
haven't given them the
but
tools.
Simone, that
Yeah.
basically says that the outcomes have to be equal no matter what
Yes.
no
Yeah,
matter
the
who
outcomes
is
have to be equal.
smarter, no matter who is smarter or harder working, which
Yes.
basically says that if half the group just chooses not to work at all, that they need to have the same income level as the other half who chooses to work their butts off.
That is not what I said at all.
I
To use
think
your
we're
example,
conflating. Sorry to interrupt. I think we're conflating the equity and equality thing. I could give a personal example.
They're
I'm
different.
teaching a class online, and this is the first time in my 25 years that I've had a deaf person in my class, and they have access to two sign interpreters in the class, and they take turns, and it's a really interesting dynamic. But that would be a great example where equal opportunity means they can all sign up for the class, but because she's deaf, she gets extra help. That is, I think, what Simone is trying to get to. And it's the same example of the boxes,
yeah.
which is depending on the context or disability or any of the issues, we're trying to make it access plus to make it fair for everyone to have, quote, the same opportunity.
Right. Which
But
does not mean that the deaf person which does not mean
I
that the
kind of
deaf
agree with
person and everybody else in the class get the same grade. It just means that the deaf
right.
person gets an
Yeah,
interpreter
right.
so
So I
that
kind of
there's
agree with,
equity, but
yeah.
it doesn't mean equal outcomes, Simone. It
Right.
just means that everybody has
It
an equal
depends on how
opportunity.
you define outcome. That's why I
Yeah,
realized that we're getting
I
confused.
think
If you
planning
think
outcome, the opportunity. Yeah,
exactly, if you think I'm saying that everybody should get an A, that's not what I was saying.
right,
I'm saying
exactly.
What do
everybody
you
should be in
mean
the
by
classroom.
outcome?
I'm saying everybody should have an opportunity to be in the classroom. Everybody should have an opportunity to pass. Everybody should have that. That's the opportunity is the outcome, right? Everybody gets a degree, right?
Well,
To use
not
your
necessarily.
example,
If someone chooses not to study and they choose to party all the time and they learn
yeah,
nothing in college, they don't get a
yeah,
degree. That's still
but they
equity if
still
they had
got
the opportunity to do those things.
I think it's all about fairness. Ultimately, we always
It
come
is
down to
ultimately about fairness, and that's where I think Sean would generally has been telling me if I'm not misunderstanding you, Sean, you generally have been saying that there's an expectation of equal outcomes, not equal opportunities.
Correct. Equity is about equal outcomes versus equality is about equal opportunities. And often the criticism of equality is that it doesn't take into account things like historic marginalization or racism or economic hardships and all these other things.
And I
And
think
that's
where we're
why often they'll
I think
say
you're
if the
using different
outcomes
definitions of outcomes, to be honest.
well, they'll often say that if there's a disparity in demographics compared to the population in, say, your club, your job, government, that disparity is only there because of some form of systemic racism, oftentimes.
Okay, we only have 30 minutes left, so I'm gonna shorten
Really jump-
things. And I hate to do it because that's an important topic, and I think we should have another conversation, like an entire night focused on what's the difference between equity and equality and the similar things and what should we strive for. So I'm gonna take that as an action item. John, I think we went to you, so I'm gonna go to Jean Piero and put your hand down, John, if that's okay. You got it. Jean Piero. And I'm gonna let Carl host for 2 minutes. I'm gonna step away and then yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, thank you very much. Say for cultural, it's a cultural thing because, for example, if I, like Simon said, for example, we have an patriarchal society, so that's why we have racism from the men against the women, not the other way around. Another example, for example, I'm originally from Italy. In Italy, it's a very sportive country. We love sport. So as long as you're able to run faster, to be athletic enough, bring medals to Italy, then we don't care. We couldn't care the least where the person come from in the world. But for anything else, then if he has grandparents or great grandparents from abroad, then they should go back to their country. I think we had one. We try once to get to put one black politician in parliament, and she has to go out straight away. We throw her out straight away. But in England, where I am since 2001, the opposition leader is a black woman. She was born in London, but she has a Nigerian parents, and they seem to have no problem with that. So it's all a cultural things everywhere. It depends. There are paradoxes. For example, black people, they don't like the slave traders. They topple the statue of the slave traders at some point. But then the lots of black people favorite song is Amazing Grace. It was written by a slave by a slave master. And they bring their children to watch Snow White, which is who is beautiful because she has the white skin. So there's this type of paradoxes and contradiction. Thank you.
Good timing, Garrett.
Thanks for sharing that, Jean Pierre. Anyone have comments on that?
I guess I'll continue to reiterate that it seems in this group we're only able to conceive of power in terms of roles, and power is not a role. When I talk about power, I'm not talking about a role. The examples that have been given has been we have a black person who's a politician, we have a black person who's a police, we have a black person who is in power in government, and that is not the type of power I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you have two students in a class, that's their role. So it's lateral, it's horizontal, same level, and one student is black, and one student is white, and one student is, let's say, Indian. The black student does not have the racial privilege that the Indian and white student has. The Indian student has less racial privilege than the white person, but more racial privilege than the black person. And the white person has more racial privilege than the Indian student and the black person. That's the hierarchy.
Simone, with all due respect, you're creating that hierarchy without any definition of how the hierarchy is defined. And that's why I think people, including me, keep going back to the traditional power structures, because you have in your head a hierarchy of races that I don't have in my head, and I can't figure out how you're justifying
Oh,
it or
how could
rationalizing it.
and I forget. I have that tendency. Not okay. This is so. It's not a me argument. This is not. Oh, this is Simone's argument. This is what is in the literature, right? So in my head, if I could draw something, I have a pyramid, a triangle, and it's gradients, and it goes from white to black, or because nobody's literally black, white, shades of brown to the darkest brown possible. That's what I have in my head. And so when I'm inserting different races, I'm thinking a lot of Indian people, but surely not all of them, are of a lighter hue than a lot of black people. I will say that there are Indian people who are just as dark as I am. There are Aboriginal people, indigenous people, especially in Polynesia, that are just as dark as I am. It still applies. Those are the people I'm seeing at the bottom. Whoever has the darkest skin color is at the bottom. Whoever has the whitest skin color is at the top.
In your example, what if the professor is biased towards black people?
That's a bad thing.
I know, but you just
But
said
you
that
would still not call it racism.
you presumed
Yeah.
the white person had the privilege, but if it's a black professor, let's say, who is biased against white people, isn't the opposite true?
That they what are you saying is the opposite?
Your example is three people in a classroom, all things being equal, you're assuming the white person has the privilege. I'm asking you if the professor is biased against white people, isn't the opposite true?
Or
Doesn't the
just
black person
say
have the
that
privilege?
say the professor is biased where the darker the skin is, the more preference they give, and they simply assign grades based on skin color, and that the darker the skin, the higher the grade, and the lighter the skin, the worse the grade. Like, wouldn't, but the interesting thing is, I think, Simone, you would still say that's not racism.
I would say that's prejudice. It's discriminatory. It goes against
Right.
school policy. I wouldn't use racism to
So,
define to
so
describe
again,
that.
I would challenge you to ask, where is this idea that there is this hidden hierarchy of skin tone color being the end all be all of like how everybody sort of subliminally has power? Like, how does skin tone give someone power, and where did this come from? But this is something that, I want to get to all the hands up. So I just want to like plant that
Okay.
seed as like, and I'll look it up in
I'll
ChatGPT
tell
about
you.
where
I'll
this.
tell you where it
Uh,
came from. It came from England. It came from Britain. Even in Asia, with the creams that you apply to your face to become lighter, right? This all came from England. Let me tell you, there's an Englishman behind this. Thank you.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
all those people, Mandy, are dead. So anyone that like, was
Oh, so
about.
It's
yes, it doesn't
no,
matter
but
that they're dead. There's a thing called a bloodline. So it will always follow along. The bloodlines always follow. It's all about the
What
bloodline.
the
You can read
hell are
people through the bloodline. Yes. Yeah, read them through the
it's
bloodline.
it's called colorism, and it happens, and it's something that's noticeable based on like wherever you go. I think if you're not familiar with it, then you're privileged. You're going
It's
about
not about not
area.
being familiar with the fact that a lot of cultures do make that prioritization. Like, I agree that a lot of people do. I've met a lot of people who have those preferences, right? But why is this something that is an innate hierarchical structure that is believed to be so perseverant that we're gonna re-commandeer the word racism in order to like try to, I don't know if it's this idea that we're going to combat that hidden hierarchy. I mean, not all of us have that hierarchy, right? Like that's,
Well,
I
like.
and that's why I said
okay.
I'm not here to debate racism. Like that's
Mhm.
an established fact. I would need folks you need to read. And I don't say
Yeah,
that, egotistically, but like there is a body of literature
I
over a
mean,
century.
no,
to be honest,
just
Simone, if there's a
very
good
quickly.
argument, we can come up with a good argument,
Yeah,
like, and we can research a good, whether or not there's a good argument for it. I don't have to read 600 pages to understand a good
No.
argument. A good argument can
mhm.
be made in a couple of minutes, and if it can't be made in a couple of minutes, I'd argue it's not that good of an argument in general. If you can't
No,
at
but
least put the tip of the pyramid of a good argument in a couple of minutes to make someone curious enough to read more, then I would argue there may not be a good argument under those
w-
600 pages. But that said, I really want to get to Kyle because we have, like
wait,
10 hands up
just one,
and 20
one
minutes.
second, just 1 second to
Go
help
ahead
Simone
quickly,
out.
JT.
Yeah, just to help Simone out here. People are coming up with like the negative of what actually exists. Even in India or anywhere you go, if you're white, the whiter you are, the higher you are in beauty, in it. That's just the way it is.
No,
I
I
hate to
think
tell you guys that.
there
that's
are a lot
nonsense.
of places that
And it's
that's true.
actually true because there is it's colorism because it happens like when you said Uganda and stuff like that. I mean, there's part of it because of ethnicity or nationality
Let me
or
ask this, is it true for
colorism.
you, Naila?
Yes.
So you believe that the whiter someone is, the more you find them attractive, period. Like
No,
they
I don't
could
find them
be,
attractive, but it's real. Colorism is real because, I when I went to school, I was called dark skinned black, and there my mom who was a lighter
your personal
complexion.
way of judging people, though, if you have two people who are equally intelligent, equally educated, equal in all ways, but one has lighter skin and one has darker skin, you're going to like the lighter skin one more. You're going to listen to them more. You're going to value them more. You're going to put them higher in a hierarchy.
No,
Well,
but
neither would I. So guess what? We don't all have that hierarchy built into us.
But we
No,
have
but
it
not
systemically.
really.
We have it
but
systemically. You may not have it
subconsciously,
Yeah.
interpersonally, but you have it systemically and you have it
yeah.
institutionally. It
Yes.
is
Let's
instaured.
keep going. Let's keep going to, I want to get to
Yeah.
Cal because
So
we've been on this point for like 10 minutes now. So
subconsciously, we
please,
all have it,
Yeah.
How
Simone,
do you
just very
measure
quickly.
this?
unless
Yes.
you bring it out.
Simone, just
At the
very
law
quickly.
school I
sorry,
went
but
to,
like some of my best significant others had very dark skin. There's no like I don't have it. I'm sorry. I don't
Well,
agree.
because
Like
you worked on yourself.
yes, I did. And
Yeah,
I definitely did
exactly.
have it
That's
as
what
a
I'm
kid growing
saying.
up with no dark skinned people my first like 18 years of my life. I did have it, but I also said, man, like once I got to college and I was in a more diverse place, I said, wow, this is very different. And like all these people that I've never interacted with, people that look like, like from different cultures. Like I grew up in like, all like 95% white people until I was 18. So it took a lot of work, but it
No, so
also
that's what that's what I think the underlying premise here is, that you do have to work on it.
yeah, but
It
I also have friends that are white
no,
that
you
grew up
don't.
in neighborhoods that are like 95 to 99% black, right? They
Did you
didn't
hear
have
what
to
she said
work
about
on,
subconsciously? This is
yeah.
key in CRT. CRT
Yes.
believes all white people are racist, whether they are on the surface or not, because all white people have subconscious racism. It's an
Just,
original sin concept.
No, not
just,
all white
just
people,
because
every people, all people.
It's explicit in CRT. That's the only way you maintain a white nationalist country. It's explicit in the theory.
And if I can jump in here, if it's because it's not personally true to you, doesn't mean it's not true. It's totally true. Basically,
If you treat it
Thank
like a
you for
universal,
confirming it. I
is.
appreciate that.
so if something is universally true, if you're going to say that it's true for everybody, it has to actually be true for everybody. So for me to prove that it's not true for everybody, all I have to do is prove that it's not true for me. I don't have to do anything else. Otherwise,
I
it's
would,
not universally true. It's true for the majority of people at best, but not for everybody.
and if I may jump in here, what's so hard about this discussion is also that we don't have a foundational understanding about some of the terms that we're discussing, because again, we are mixing up interpersonal racism with systemic racism with institutional racism.
I'm
They
going to
all
get to
show up
those
differently.
definitions. Yeah, I'm going to get to the definitions of the different types
Because
of racism.
to
So
your
let's let
point,
Kyle go, and then I'll go into the definitions of the different types of racism that I think is actually a better way to approach this whole subject. But it's been a long time. I've had my hand up for forever. I don't want to introduce a new topic without my hand up. So Kyle, go ahead.
Foremost, thank you all for behaving respectfully, but more so, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Garrett and Simone. Simone, I really hope that you come back and lead another discussion. I do agree with you wholeheartedly that education seems to be lacking, so that everyone can have the basic understanding to move forward with this discussion. And again, thank you so much for your time. And I gotta go, but have a good night.
Thanks, Kyle. So the definitions that I want to cover that I think are actually better than the and I'm going to make this bold claim, but I'm a free thinker, so I'm allowed to challenge people who are authorities and trust my own judgment. I'm going to say that ChatGPT, who is actually smarter than any human being alive, if you look at the amount of knowledge that it has, and even the amount of wisdom that it has, I'm going to go with ChatGPT's opinion on this. Basically, instead of redefining racism in the way that the academics have decided to redefine it, I think that saying that racism uses the common term and then talking about interpersonal racism as between people, institutional racism as discriminatory practices or outcomes through an institution, and structural or systemic racism as like interacting like having institutions, laws, norms, and historical conditions that systemically disadvantage racial groups. Using those terms, I think, would be much more beneficial for everybody and actually work much better at reducing the amount of racism in the world. So I think that's a better approach than trying to say that certain races can't be racist. What do you think about that, Simone, just out of curiosity?
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to respond. Let me go back to, because I was going to pull up, because I did actually also ask ChatGPT before this. I'm going to read to you what ChatGPT told me, and it'll show you where my head is going with this. So I said, can Black people be racist? ChatGPT said, yes. If racism is defined as prejudice, discrimination, hostility, or stereotyping based on race, then people of any racial background, including Black people, can be racist. Some people use a narrower definition that distinguishes between individual racism, which is the bulk of the examples that have been presented today have been individual racism, which is racial prejudice or discriminatory behavior by a person. Under this definition, anyone can be racist. Systemic or institutional racism, patterns of policies, institutions, and social structures that produce racial inequalities. Discussions about who could be racist sometimes focus on this broader concept and on the relationship between prejudice and societal power. Because different people are using different definitions, conversations on this topic can become confusing. One person may mean racial prejudice by an individual, while another means a system of racial oppression. And that's why we keep getting, because Garrett is speaking about racial prejudice by an individual. I'm speaking about a system of racial oppression.
No, I just gave 4 definitions of racism that included everything you're talking about, just in terms that are intuitive, clear, and have better, for me, that are more intuitive and clear, and don't create a racist definition of racism. Again, like, I think if you create a racist definition of racism, you immediately incite all the racists. When you make your racist definition of racism, you make racists more angry, and you make the white supremacists gain power. And that's exactly what we've seen, in recent years. But
if we continue to use definitions that are too narrow, we're never going to get to the heart of solving our issues in inequity. And we're going to think everything is equivalent when it's not. We don't have.
Well, I
don't
agree
all
with
come
you,
to
but the
this
narrow definition is the academic definition. That's the more narrow definition. The
I would disagree and
accepted
say
definition is
your
the more
definition.
general definition.
Simone, why do you think that race is the top of the privilege category as opposed to the infinite number of other categories we discriminate on?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
I never said that.
Okay, that's right. I'm just curious because there are an infinite number of categories. We can go by age, we can go by weight, we can go by attractiveness, by culture.
It's what we just happened to be discussing today.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. It just seems that there's such a priority on this particular one as opposed to many of the others.
But if I may add, though, I don't think that this will be resolved by just talking about definitions. And this is more about educating. It's more about hanging out with people, getting to know other people. If we could bring up the Daryl Davis example of him befriending KKK leaders and turning them around, right? Just from strictly getting to know each other and being friendly with each other and understanding each other. That's the answer, more than just a definition.
Guys, I want to get
Simone,
to
if we want to,
people that haven't spoken yet. So, Sean, I'm sorry, we're not going to get to you another time. I want to get to the folks that haven't
can I
had
ask
the
just
chance to raise
a
their hand.
clarifying question that can put this to bed, maybe? Simone, if you were just to recommend a couple of authors that would illustrate the hierarchy that you were trying to illustrate, who would you recommend? Like Delgado,
Off the top
Crenshaw,
of my head,
Bell?
I could create a reading list, but off the top of my head,
Okay.
I like Ta-Nehisi Coates. I like Kimberly Crenshaw. I like Robin D'Angelo? She's a white woman who writes about this, white
We've talked about
fragility.
it.
Guys, do me a favor,
That's
Simone, come to the Discord server and then put your reading list there. Sunny, go ahead.
Simone, there's Isabel Wilkerson too with Caste.
Guys,
Yes.
we really have like 4 or 5 people that have their hands up that have not gone to speak at all, and we have 10 minutes left. So I'm going to say less than 1 minute for raising your hand, 1 minute for conversation. We're going to go speed rounds here. So Sunny, go ahead.
So thank you for this conversation. It was very interesting. But you know, the whole conversation about white and black this is just an American issue. You know, and I just looked up some numbers here. 80% of the world is non-white, and so 20% is white. And so this whole issue, it's almost the topic itself is racist. You're ignoring the globe. So you got to bring everybody in. And so this is where I am. I know I'm half joking here, but at least to bring your attention, like sometimes we think we have our own hubris, you know, we think we are, you know, it's just, the funny part is the Americanization of this whole DEI in India. In India, we have the caste system issue. And DEI is being promoted there in India. What a joke. What a joke that is.
I don't think the idea of whether or not racism is defined in a way that it feels inherently fair versus if it's defined in a way that's racist is taking out any portion of the world. I think that's an important distinction between whether or not we use a version of racism that's racist or we use one that is inclusive across the very diverse world we live in, recognizing that white people are a minority. So I don't know if I'm agreeing or disagreeing with you, Sunny. I'm just kind of sharing that I think the topic of fairness resonates with people of all races and backgrounds and et cetera.
Yeah, in support to you, Garrett, I think it is a personal issue more than a groupthink issue. You know, you lump a particular race, that's a problem. It's an individual. You have good people in every race. You have good people and bad people. And we got to kind of deal with the crime, not try to come up with this hate crime. Whoa, wow, that's interesting. You add some fancy words to it. Just deal with the crime. Let's move on. We have good people in every race.
Thanks, Sunny. Mandy, go ahead.
Since we're talking about India, I just want to add one thing. Even in India, the whiter you are, the better you're treated, the more beautiful you are.
Go ahead, Mandy.
Yeah, I think that with the racism definition, academically, yeah, it works for people with academic. It doesn't work on the street. On the street, when you think about racism, it's only the white people who are racist. That's how it comes across. But over in academia, right, in university or whatever, they talk this way. But on the streets is where the people are at, and people don't think that way. To people, if you are colorful like myself, right, you just assume, not just assume, it's like majority are going to be racist, and then you've got a few who aren't. And also coming from England, in England, I was called black because in England, you're black or white. And we even were racist against the Irish and the Scottish. They look white, but they're not white.
Very
right?
good point, yeah.
Yep. And then in Canada, I'm called brown now because now I'm no longer allowed to be black. I have to be in a different category from blacks. right? And I'm like, okay, fine, wherever you like, you are the ruling class, So I just wanted to make a point that, yeah, wherever you are in different countries, who's black and who's white, it's very different. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Mandy. Good to see you. Jenna, go ahead.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, so I'd like to return to Jyoti's example earlier because I think it shifts the focus from labeling someone racist to understanding the psychology behind the reaction. So I question whether the fear towards someone because of their race should automatically be called racism. And I think we should distinguish between an automatic reaction and the judgment we make afterwards. So if Jyoti sees like a large unfamiliar man at night and feels nervous with that, that should be like have several factors on it, including her personal background. But I think if she made like a comment that it is a black person that she is scared of, then I think there is some kind of racial inference in that. I think what matters here as well is that if she thinks that she is uncomfortable, like when we begin to examine that and accept it and try to like act on it, like separate them, I think that's like how we could try to challenge our bias. And I think also we should be careful about treating every negative reaction as unconscious racism, because if unwanted thoughts are treated as moral failures, I think people may respond with shame and defensiveness, and perhaps that could exacerbate as well racism. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenna. Simone, did you want to reply?
Oh, yes.
I wasn't putting you on the spot. I just heard you start to talk.
No, I was like, I agree. I have responses and things to add to everything, but I also want everybody to have a chance to speak, so I will hold.
Okay. Shrivasta.
Yeah. Hi, Garrett. I was a little late to the discussion today, but nonetheless, the latter end. I don't know much to say really, but all I can say is what's being discussed, me is neither black nor white. I cannot relate to anything that was said today. So I know one person made a claim that, yeah, I mean, half, if not more, of the globe is neither black nor white. Yes, this American experience of both sides is being superimposed on the rest of the world. I am East Indian. I have East Indian. I'm of East Indian heritage. India was colonized too. And one of the first things my dad told me when we moved was, you're going to face some experiences. You're going to have some experiences. We're moving to a small town. Sure enough, I did. Walking to school, taking my brother to school, walking back. But I took it all and helped me grow, helped me mature, see the world for what it is. Grit, resilience, built it all. Now, do I play victim endlessly? No. But do I cease to recognize the evil at hand? No. So it's a balanced approach. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Agreed. I think a balanced approach is very wise. And I think it's important to recognize the lack of fairness whenever it rises up around the world. And I think it's important that we all strive to be as fair as we can. And that's really a big part of what we try to do in the FTI is to try to make the world a more fair place for everybody. Fair as I defined it, meaning prevent significant unnecessary harm first, and then increase happiness and decrease harm in the world, which, by the way, I failed to put a link about the FTI in the chat. I'll do that now and then let Michael go. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi there. I have a couple of quick comments, and I think I'm going to have two questions for Simone. One comment is, so critical race theory is a pretty direct descendant of critical theory, going back a little bit further. It's basically applied Marxism in a sense. In my estimation, some of the authors that have been recommended are people that had the theory explained to them, and they're just, some of these people are kind of dim people, or they didn't really understand the theory. I posted a list of authors that I take to be like the actual theorists. But I have two questions though. One question is, in the pursuit of good answers to the problems with racism, why would we want or need to imbibe deeply from Marxist theory? What's helpful about that? And the other question I have for you, Simone, is in your learning and in your travels within this space, have you been achieving progress with critical consciousness, like in such a way that you would call it critical consciousness and sort of consciously track it in a way?
Wow. What? It's a slightly esoteric question. I haven't studied Marx in a very long time, but when you say why must we imbibe Marxist theory without bastardizing Marx, my understanding of Marxism and also why we want to talk about racial privilege and power is because this world works on power. And I know Paul, another person had wanted me to give the direct definite definition of power. It's very hard to do that on the spot. I would challenge anybody to give a definition of power that's universally accepted, right? It's one of those things where we know when we're disempowered though, and we know when something has been done wrong to us by and large. And so I think it's important to borrow from theories and frameworks that explain power and how do we become empowered, and how do we therefore think about distribution of power insofar as we think that's something that needs to happen. I think your second question was about basically, is this working? That's what I got from it. He talks about the consciousness. DEI has its limits. I'm not like I am a supporter of DEI, but DEI has its limits. It is not the same thing as anti-racism. Anti-racism also has its limits. One of the reasons why I didn't want to really practice as a lawyer is because law also has its limits. It's a legal system, not a justice system. None of these things get us into a perfect place, but they get us quite close.
Whatever it is that we want to say about power, though, would you agree with a professor if a professor or an academic told you that the root cause of all the problems with regard to power ultimately come down to capitalism?
I would go a step, and this is going to be one of my closing comments, assuming that I got closing comments. Capitalism comes from white supremacy. And I think that's also why a lot of us are struggling in this conversation. I've heard a couple of folks who I'm going to assume are racialized, and I hate the term racialized, but I'll use it in the way that it's currently used, who are racialized, talk about why are we even talking about race? This never affected me. And that's what's so sad, is that we swim in an ocean of white supremacy that we don't recognize that we're in it. And so therefore you don't recognize how it operates and where it manifests. That's the issue. So I would push back at that professor and say, yes, a lot of this comes from capitalism, but actually capitalism is born from white supremacy. That's where we get transphobia. That's where we get fat phobia. White supremacy is the house, capitalism, racism, children.
Wait, how does the private ownership of production have anything to do with race?
The private ownership of production. I'm talking like when you talk about the proletariats and all that kind of stuff.
No, I mean the definition of capitalism means private ownership of the means of production, right? The idea of Marx was that the community controlled by the government, usually in practice, was the owner of the means of production.
And that was not necessarily a definition that was used in indigenous societies. And so that idea of capitalism was introduced to indigenous societies. That's why capitalism comes from white supremacy and colonialism.
Well, it may come from it, but it's not inherently it has nothing to do with the race. Like if the capital owners became, if suddenly in 100 years all capital owners were black people and everybody else was enslaved by the black, higher class, like capitalism would be a black phenomena, right? Like the owners of capitalism would be black people. So
but capitalism
is
runs
not inherently racist because it it doesn't care what race someone is that's the capital owner. It just says that capital is best run by private, private individuals or enterprises.
And capitalism runs with mercantilism, runs with racism. They all run parallel. And so that's what I mean by it's really hard to have this discussion because we all have to have a foundational understanding of white supremacy. And that's
And
what I was
capitalism,
trying.
by the way.
And
So,
capitalism, because what the colonizers brought with them to the Americas, to the Caribbean, to the Far East was they brought whiteness and they brought colonialism and they brought their way of doing that. That was
right,
happening.
but that's like saying white people invented guns, germs, and steel. White people invented guns, and therefore, like, guns are racist.
That's not the argument I'm making.
No, I mean it's an equivalent, right? Because you're saying
It's not an equivalent.
white people introduced capitalism, and therefore capitalism is racist, is the same as saying white people implement invented guns, and therefore guns are racist.
And I would say that's not an analogous argument.
Where am I missing it?
I would say that white supremacy also brought a way of thinking, because people think white supremacy is just about, who's inferior, who's not inferior. It's also a system of values. And that was brought to the Americas. Indigenous people had their own system of values, right? And so that's this idea of like how things were done in Britain, how we conceive of property, how we conceive of people. That's what was brought to the Americas, and that's why capitalism runs parallel to racism, to fat phobia. It's a lot to explain. Like I can't just explain this in 5 minutes, but hopefully that gives somebody a taste of what I mean by that.
And
basically, what you're saying
it's also what capitalism like brought was a sense of ownership. Like indigenous people did not have a value for land. So, that's
so capitalism is a relatively modern invention in its current incarnation. It's only a couple hundred years old. Like since antiquity, there has been some sense of private ownership. And if you take ancient Greece, there was still some semblance of private ownership. I mean, the Greeks were indigenous to Greece, right? They'd been there for a very long time, but they still had a sense of private ownership as indigenous people.
But not all indigenous people had private ownership.
Okay, sure, but like you can't. It's just all I'm saying is that not all indigenous people did not have private ownership either, and so capitalism you can't.
But what you did was you transformed people into people that were owned. That's what slavery is.
And
so people were cash.
Wait, who invented slavery again?
Yeah, slavery's been around through ancient times, including in
So,
Africa, in the Middle East, including in China.
Yeah.
So
including
that's fine.
pre-Columbia America had whites had slavery.
Okay, but in the end, what it is people are owned. They have cash value. It doesn't matter where it started.
Right. So how's that white?
Or capitalistic?
I'm not saying it's white. I'm not saying it's capitalistic. I'm just saying that idea was introduced in America by white people.
No, it wasn't.
No, it was part of indigenous Native American like culture. Like the whole idea of the ball with the rubber ball game where you basically you take slaves, the Aztecs, sacrifice people that were slaves, but actually I also learned.
No, but the context that we are talking about right now is Black people that were brought here as slaves in America. That's what we're talking about right now.
That's not the only context, right? We're a global
but we
audience.
can't talk about everything at the same time. I think
but we're talking about the definition tonight. We were very narrow in that we were talking about two definitions of racism. And it's as applied to the entire world. That's really
I think that's where the conversation got completely lost. Is you can't have a global definition.
And let's not forget the Africans sold the slaves, right? They sold Africans.
Oh, let's not go down that path, Mandy.
Yeah.
that's a little more nuanced than you're making it sound.
So basically,
what I'm saying is like you need a context and boundary where you're talking about things, not
correct.
so
But
you
if
can't be
you
talking about everything at the same time.
if
Simone,
you
I
look
just
at
wanted to say thank you so much for being here.
okay, so
Thank you for having me.
basically, we don't have any personal autonomy, and every system we become a slave to that. Is that what we are saying?
Never said that either.
I think we're
Did
getting off
not say
track here,
that.
guys. We've all been talking for like a little over 2 hours, so let's kind of wrap up. I just want to thank everyone for coming. Sean, I know you had your hand up patiently. Do you have something like really quick to bring up?
Yeah, sure. I know, Simone, you'd mentioned that of the authors, Ibram Kendi was one of your recommendations. I read his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, a few years back. He had a section there where he was talking about the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. And he said the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Do you think that's out of context? Do you agree with that? Do you think that he's essentially saying to pay for historic wrongs, we have to adjust, have the pendulum swing the other way or overcompensate in some way? How do you take that? Because I know it's a recommended
The
reading.
way, yeah, the way I understand that line is back to our conversation about equity.
Mm-hmm.
When we go back to this idea of, again, and I know not everybody has seen it, but the ballpark and
Right.
the little blocks, and some people will look at that as, well, how come the short person gets 2 blocks? That's discrimination. And if you apply a brutal definition of discrimination, that's true. That is discrimination, right? Affirmative action is a type of discrimination. Not all discrimination is bad, right? Thank you, Garrett, for pulling it
But
up.
when
That's
you measure things that way, you take choice of the individual completely out of the equation.
Tell me more.
What if the person who can't see is there because they had a very poor life path because of their choices?
I think
That
though, let
Didn't
me, if I
study
can just
all
jump
that.
in, Simone, in the case of these 3 people in equity, any one of these 3 people could step off the box, or this guy could kneel down. They have the life choice to not see the ball game. All that this is doing is giving them the opportunity to see the ball game. So I agree with you, Paul. Someone makes poor life choices and decides, you know what, they gave me 2 boxes, but I'm going to stand on the ground anyway because I want to stand on my own 2 feet. I don't want any help.
Maybe the
Then they're
little
not
guy
going to
can
get
make a
help. They're not
ladder.
going to see the ball game.
The little guy can make a box himself. See, the thing is you're ignoring choices. If people make bad choices, they're going to end up in a bad place. In a truly free society, there will always be unequal outcomes.
They also could pay for tickets and get seats.
I mean, Jesus said you will always have the poor among you.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I actually don't disagree with you, Paul. But I don't think just because you made bad choices doesn't mean you don't get to see the game. You know what I
Really?
mean? Yeah,
No,
I
I
think
don't. I
so.
think
Like, I
and
think
you're
so.
seeking equal outcomes, you reward bad choices.
This is a good place to pause because we're going to come back to equality and equity and whether, what does it mean to have equal outcomes? I think that Paul, Sean, I think you guys are using a different definition of equal outcomes than Simone and I are using, but I could be wrong. And let's find out next time because it's 9:12 and I got to get my kids to sleep as
Okay,
usual
thank you,
when it's
Garrett.
after 9. So I do want to thank everybody for coming, for the thoughtful dialogue, for the diverse perspectives. Simone, you have helped me better understand Paul and Sean's perspective in past events. So I appreciate that. And Sean and
Thank you so
Paul,
much.
I hope you heard that very loud and clear. That said, I still maintain the perspective that I had is still not one that is foreign to humanity. And
No.
and so I think that there are other people that believe similarly to the way that I believed. In fact, a lot of people that I've worked with did. And so, Simone, I would very much appreciate if you could go back and look at our video. And if you go to YouTube and go to Freethinker Institute, DEI or Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and then tell me if you think I got it wrong. I would appreciate that. So you can email me.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you for
Hope-
having me. I'm
Thank you,
thankful for the
Simone.
humility.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot,
Garrett.
everybody.
Thank
And
you
as always,
again.
I like to say the guests
Good
make the
night.
party. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Garrett, for
Bye.
what it's
Bye.
worth, I agree with you on this one.
Okay, thanks.